2004, I decided to write some software for my local Let's group, Hamlet in Cambridge. And before I started, I think it was before, I contacted Michael and said, is there any way I should be going about this? Are there any users of any other softwares that I should be taking into account? Michael, what did you say at that time?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, you said we need to concentrate on open money. Let's is all old hat.
Yeah.
It's all about multiple currencies now.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I want to serve my existing community to do what they want to do and not to focus on new, innovative, untested designs. So I built that, and Hamlet didn't use it, and I went away and did something else for a few years. And then I came back in 2008 with a new tool called Drupal. And I need to tell you what Drupal is, because it's important to the platform dynamics I'm going to discuss and all the politics that you get between the platforms. So Drupal is a software system that helps you to build online community web applications. And it's an open source framework that gives you, when you install it, a system of user logins and content types and many other components that you generally need to build websites. And as a developer, it's my job to write a Drupal module to do a certain function that can then be configured without writing any code for different use cases. And so I set about in 2008 to write the mutual credit module for Drupal. And that would be a component in a generic open source ecosystem so that any Let's could plug in their own mutual credit module into Drupal, and then they could configure it in any way they wanted to support their own experimental currency designs. And alongside the mutual credit module, I then wrote an offers and wants module. Very simple, it just allows users to post their offers and their wants and to manage them, maybe expire them, put them in categories. And so those two modules I maintained myself. In partnership with the CELDULAC in Geneva, we did a collaboration and produced the first of what would be the Communityforge websites. So Tim Anderson in Geneva continued with this partnership to make Communityforge, which was then offering these cookie-cutter websites for Let's. So they had a certain amount of configuration, but the idea was there's a whole open source package which gives you a software for Let's, and you can just migrate your data in and off you go. And so working with Tim, I was writing the code, he was managing the requirements, and he networked throughout all the French-speaking Let's networks. And over time, we now have 140 Let's websites and other sites running on one web server. We're able to support them all in a very efficient way. It was always my hope as a software developer that what I'd done by producing this high-quality open source code would be picked up and built on, so that other people would come along and add to my code and innovate around it. But this just hasn't happened. In my coding life so far, in the last 8 years, I've been mostly alone. And I'm maintaining a large body of code myself now. But there has been wonderful collaboration with many people who are not doing the coding level. The collaboration has come from the implementers, like Stephanie, for example. I went to Dane County and spent a month there implementing the software, migrating it in, making a few new features. And so the power of collaboration has not come for me through working with other coders, it's come through working with people who are on the ground. At that point, when I was offering this Drupal distribution, which is called Hamlet, I was thinking of it as a lifeboat. So I knew that not very many communities were doing that, but in principle, there was this piece of software that the community, once it woke up, once it realized it was a community, could download this piece of software, and then you would have a local exchange network and a lifeboat for the inevitable financial collapse which, though I was panicking about it then, it's still coming. Whether it be quickly or slow, but that's not the context of this talk. I was very happy in 2010 when Art contacted me, working on behalf of Timebank USA, who wanted to use Drupal. And we collaborated. I went over to Art's house and we helped code up the mutual credit module. And Timebank USA used Drupal for the next 2 or 3 years, although without too much success from the larger project management point of view. Also on that trip, I visited Carol Bruyere in California, and she had a website called CommunityCurrency.org. And it wasn't running a community currency, but I had to help her because she was very much in the field. It was all about 9/11 truth for her in those days, but still. I spent a day and converted her HTML website into a content management Drupal site, and since then I've been receiving perception dollars on demand by the thousand. This is a job that yielded infinitely more than I gave. And anyone who wants a perception dollar, it can have one after this. I also worked with Leander at one point. He was working in Brussels and he had an idea for a currency called Honeys and the Hubbies, to work in a hot desking space called the Hub. And we put it together, and unfortunately they didn't use it. But it was a nice opportunity to build on what I'd done, because I've got the tools to build all kinds of community currencies, but I don't have the time to actually build them. It's the next layer of development. So just occasionally, I could team up with people and do something interesting quickly and powerfully with the tools that I've built. But I'm still the only one maintaining those tools. And so I don't have a lot of time to venture out into these actual real-world projects. Also, I want to mention the Banglapesa project. We have a friend, Will Ruddick, in Kenya, and he's doing appropriate community currency projects for Africa, which don't involve mobile phone interfaces at the moment,
Sorry, what project was that?
or any technology. Banglapesa. The website is grassrootseconomics.org. So Communityforge is a network of Let's groups, and that movement is not very ambitious when it comes to thinking about the whole transition discourse, thinking about changing the world. They're quite complacent and locally focused. And I was clear with Tim right from the start in 2009 that we wanted to work through the Let's movement in order to grow the software ecosystem, to have a real user base, and then to expand outwards into more innovative fields and other kinds of communities and other movements, to give them the insight and the tools to do local exchange. And so I'm talking to other movements, including transition towns and eco-village networks and anybody else I can get hold of. But I gradually shifted focus from Communityforge, which is now working very, very well. It's sort of spun off and it looks after itself. I just have to write the code. And there's a support team of maybe 5 to 8 people. They meet every month. They handle support requests. They make new installations. The whole thing just ticks over very nicely. So I've been able to move on and think about the next part of the big picture. And for me, that involved collaborating with CES. That's Community Exchange Systems. It's based in South Africa. And CES was built by a super activist over the last 15 years. It's called Tim Jenkins. And there's whole stories about him, which I don't have time for. It's very similar to Communityforge in what it does, except that the architecture is very different, because in Communityforge we're giving one Drupal site to everybody and saying, this is your site, you can do what you want with it, please develop it, please hack it, whatever, we'll just host it for you. And CES was a different model which said, we've got this web service, software as a service, your community can create an account on our web server, and then you can trade between members of your community, but also between the communities, because they're all closely connected on one web server. The CES managed to move beyond this model. They spawned a fork of all the Let's groups in Australia. So CES was then running on 2 servers. It's really old code and clunky API. But they got the two servers talking to each other so that they could do transactions between the Australian group and the South African group. And then later on, the Catalonia Interoperability, which we heard from Enric Duran, who's doing fair co-op. That's a sort of globalized attempt to do what he did in Catalonia with the Catalonia Interoperability. They're running now a Drupal site which is part of the CES ecosystem, which could trade with the other two web servers through Clearing Central. So this whole thing is growing. I want to get in there and I want to support it, and I want to help them move to open source. So I've been talking to an Australian called Carol Buller, who's a consultant and activist, and he managed to get a contract from the Australian government to do the timebanking.com.au site. So that's the Timebanks for New South Wales. And he managed to make a collaboration with CES, because all the Timebanks in Australia were using CES already. And they agreed that they would rewrite the CES software in order to run the Timebanks in Australia. And so there's some money, a bit of a trickle, coming to do that massive task. And he had a developer that was keen to do it. He said it could be done. We'll do it in Drupal 8, which isn't even out yet. It was 18 months ago. And then I would just offer support. It didn't work that way. The super Drupal 8 developer, who was project lead, had a motorbike accident, and suddenly it all came down to me to deliver on all of his promises. I'm still working on that, and Drupal 8 still isn't out itself yet, even though the mutual credit module is pretty much ready for testing. But it's not only about what's happening with CES. So I've described to you the Drupal ecosystem, which I've been building up around me, collaborating with everyone who will collaborate. But there are other platforms in the same space. So last year I was invited to a time banking conference where, not to go into too much detail, the Timebanks USA have had their own software platform. They were working on Drupal, and they decided they couldn't cope with Drupal anymore, and somebody offered to build Community Weaver 3 and some other platform. They didn't even talk to me. Meanwhile, another group called Our World had built this software. It wasn't open source, but there were about 3 of them collaborating, and they were really powerful. And they managed to get about 700 time banks using their software with the purity of their intention. It's not open source, I have to say. And at that point I saw that my hope that we could all use open source software and that we could all share platforms and tools was rather too optimistic, and we needed to pull back and think about how we can become interoperable on a different level. And so the focus then changes from not let's all use the same platform, because the platforms are just too diverse, and different platforms serve different needs, let's be honest. What we need to be doing is to be using the same protocols. The word came up yesterday. So different platforms can perform distinct functions. Like there's a function that says, let's record a debt between us. And you can have a protocol for that, and then it doesn't matter what platform each party is using. We could have another protocol that says, let's publish someone's intention, someone's offer or their want. And let's publish that in a public space with a geolocation, and then you can just search the area around you, regardless of what platforms people are on, and regardless of which movements they're in, almost. So, but by using this protocol, we can all work together, but still maintain our own membrane. And so that's the direction I've been trying to push things in the last couple of years. So to talk not about platforms, but about APIs. So with that in mind, I was approached by an eco-village agency that was really good at applying for money for European projects. And that was called a CAPS proposal, Collective Awareness Platforms for Sustainability. They're giving away millions of euros to completely arbitrary causes. Yes,
did you get it then?
We spent 3 months making a 70-page application. and it was pretty great because the partners, we had 17 partners, including the Eco-Village networks. We've got Our World, Timex UK, Timex USA, Timex Australia, and the French Let's movements working around Communityforge and some Italians, and we kept the Spanish off there because they don't like to be official. But it was what I was hoping and still hope could be a sort of centre of gravity. There were all those names. They'd signed up each to receive €5,000 in the course of the project budgeting.
Oh, wow.
But nonetheless, they were signed up with a shared intention to have interoperability around transactions and around offers and wants. So it's still my hope to push that forward and to make that happen. In another talk, which I don't know which I'll be able to give, I'd like to talk more about the economy that arises out of that infrastructure. And I called it in the proposal the credit commons. Picking up from what Thomas Greco has been talking about. Thomas Greco is really into business barter systems. Unfortunately, we didn't get any business barter networks into that proposal. It was all about non-profit community networks. The business barter system is doing exactly the same thing, just in dollars or promises of dollars. Promises of goods and services denominated in dollars. So parallel to that building up of the technical infrastructure, I'd like to see a discourse built up where we start talking about the economy not in terms of top-down control and assuming that money is issued by the government or by the banks or whoever, but start talking about the economy as the people working together and issuing credit to each other between trusted groups. So that means I could issue credit to somebody in a different community because my credit is sort of backed or guaranteed by my community who know me. And that means my credit can go further through a series of credit arrangements. And then there are other platforms which focus on other ways of doing things, because I've been coming from the Let's perspective, I've focused on the exchange function of community and the marketplace function where we advertise what we want so we can do things together. But there are other approaches supported by other software which are also worth considering. So there's another platform, Weezer, which Stephanie is using in the mutual aid network as opposed to using Drupal in the Dane County Timebank. And Weezer is not a content management system, which Drupal is. Weezer is an enterprise resource planning open source framework. So it emphasizes the business processes much more than simply posting an offer or a want. The whole point behind Stephanie choosing Weezer was that you had a process of somebody posting an intention, somebody responding, a bit of negotiation, put it in the calendar, whatever, and then it gradually goes through into a transaction with some feedback, which could be done with other kinds of metrics or currencies. Yeah, this is a whole different approach, which I just haven't been able to touch because I'm too into Drupal at the moment. Another approach, which I'd like to hear more about, is what Sensorica is doing. I'm not talking so much about community exchange, but it's getting members of the community to collaborate together on projects and thinking about the processes and the software that go into that, and also the things like recognition metrics. And those things, it's very much part of this discussion, but it starts to bleed out into all kinds of different areas of functionality. And we need to be aware, if we're thinking about software requirements, we have to be a bit specific about separating the parts of functionality. We can't just require everything in one piece of software. It's a question of finding the best fit and finding where we overlap. And there's another direction that software is going in, which is not to think about the community at all. Many complementary currency projects or innovation in finance is all around the payment systems. This is what Michael's doing now. It's concentrating on how do you get some kind of unit or accounting unit from one person to another person across a network in an integral way. And then how do you just give everybody a sort of point of sale device or a payment thing, probably on their phone, so that they can pay across the network. And Bitcoin is exactly that, and open money seeks to be exactly that. Although with some
Not like Bitcoin.
So
Yeah.
to make the payment easy and instant
And universal,
and universal
and immediate,
and immediate,
and we got it.
more immediate than Bitcoin.
And while you're talking, just to bring the awareness that Matthew might choose not to take answers and go through the whole half an hour where I will just stop it.
I've got to the end of my list now, actually.
Also maybe there's
It's going very fast. It's possible to separate off the payment function and say, let's just concentrate on that, and let's do all the offers at once and all the community management things separately. So it's a question of how you divide things up, and it's very important when you start to get into the nuts and bolts of doing things. So I've raced through everything. That's the end of my agenda. We have time.
In relation to what you're doing, Michael, and what you're doing, what I see, you're giving the interoperability, something like that, between different currencies that are out there. And I think that if we can create that first of all, and we can provide that exchange that gives people the freedom to exchange as they wish to, within communities and across communities, in a way that maintains the values, then that can get people more familiar with what's available with alternative currencies. And once that's in place, then it gives somebody a tool then where they can then create their own currency and play with it. They've got an education. It's a step up to them what they can do with open money. Because I do think what Michael's talking about giving people the freedom there, here's what Danny was talking about as well. If you give somebody something and see how they play with it, let it evolve according to their needs. So I definitely think both are really key pieces. I'll leave it there.
I've tried in the Drupal module to build in the tools to play with things like that. And while in Drupal it's not quite as easy to create a currency as it is in open money, there's a lot of tools around. You can make the currency appear as you want it to appear. It can have subunits as you want. The balance limits are specific to the currency. There's permission settings, so you can say who can use the currency.
One thing is mobile, because you'll know that before with the exchange, how we're going to create that side boss was, and then I can enter the coin and so on. So mobile is going to be key, because there's a big, I do really think if we're going to create the change in the time that we've got, before too much devastation is created, then we need to bridge the divides that we've got. And we've got a huge gaping divide between different cultures. So we need to have a means to unite those. And that's where I would loosely put the word framework, because I do think it needs to belong to whomever is using it. But it's a central place where people can and play with it under their terms. So being mobile is key. The other thing I wanted to, you mentioned Faircorp, and they created a marketplace using Drupal. The marketplace they created.
I don't know what
Do you
they're
know how
doing. I
far
can't get a
into that?
straight answer out of Enrique.
That's what I'm struggling with when I communicate with Enrique. I'm really still trying to find, can we use Faircoin and not Concoin? Because the principles and the idea of having a blockchain so that ultimately we can decentralize, that makes sense to me. I'm still not sure about how. Another key thing about it is how do we get maximizing the injection of cash in to something. And his model of doing that, I think, is very different to what we're suggesting. But can you speak to that, Michelle?
A little bit, yes, because I don't understand everything about it either. But I think there are two levels in the Faircoin project. One is just the currency that already exists, so you can just use it. And it's like Bitcoin, it's out there, it has wallets. And the other level is that they use kind of a multi-signature mutual credit system. So they're gifting Faircoins to cooperative organizations, right? So let's say you have 1,000 Faircoins. You protect them through a multi-signature process. So people those Faircoins that they're gifting cannot be used, but they can be used as collateral in a mutual trade system. So it's the same coin, but used in two different ways. One is part of it is just circulating as a commodity currency, and the other part is it's used as a collateral for mutual credit system.
So that's fair credit. Generic has been talking about this
Yes,
some
but
time.
fair credit is the amount of fair credit that you can issue is also partially determined by your collateral in Faircoin. Because if you have two co-ops who want to do a deal with each other and they don't know each other, they don't trust each other, then that mutual credit can, is backed up by these fair coins that you have in your capital account. That's the way I understand it. I hope I'm right, but that's, after a few conversations, that's what I got out of it.
I think Henrik has been having difficulty with not enough software development resources.
Yes, so the first part is already working. The second part, it's planned, but it's, it's a huge project and it's been delayed already 1 year. So I guess that's the, one of the reasons is, they're like us, they're precarious and trying to do with the resources they have.
And they've done a lot of development work though with the coin, though, which we would want to create the same thing. So we don't want to create the same thing twice. So yeah.
It's all
Sure, go ahead.
So I just to caution, this was part of the talks that I haven't put it to the agenda again because I thought we don't want to talk about money. But just at this moment where this is said, you saying Faircoin is working is just as much as this platform that Matthew built for me for the hub in Brussels is technically working, because nobody's using it. And those numbers I haven't heard from Henrik ever, how much there is actually an uplift in people using it. I know the market value of that hasn't done anything, so they don't actually have the capital infusion that they thought they had by selling Faircoins. So there's always this level of...
Yeah, it's working
It's
technically
actually-
exactly, but it's not exactly...
Which is a
you
very
know,
important
yeah.
thing in terms of being very cautious with the intentions and setting your intentions and objectives and then measuring where you got, because that was never his intention to have a technical system working. His intention is to change the fucking world, and if you have that intention, then anything less is actually still complete failure.
Well, the way to success is failure, so... Yeah.
There's a tendency in the complementary currency movement for people to over-report their successes or to not report that their project no longer is running. For example, there's the Complementary Currency database, complementarycurrency.org. People have been putting their projects on there for years and years and years, but they're totally out of date and they're not, what's the word when you... Audited. So there's a database and people could go there and say, look, there's, 5,000 currencies in the world. It doesn't mean
It's
anything.
not mean. It's, and I think that when if somebody's giving something, then they give something. If somebody creates something for themselves, then they, in the process, through a place of learning, through action, then they have something that then they want to use again. They're alive with what they've got. Whereas if you just, here you go, they don't understand it yet. And until you've got that understanding, then you're not going to get emotion for it.
I think there's a design element to consider here too. The structure of almost all complementary currencies is institutional, and it's basically old economy in its design. And I've made the analogy that almost all of them are really marine engineering trying to fly. Aircraft are not boats, and we've got a lot of boats sitting around calling themselves complementary currencies, and they're really misunderstanding the medium of their exchange, the entire process, the field of their behavior. That's the shift. Things will work when they're actually properly designed for the context within which they're designed to be effective.
That's 1 minute, Matthew.
I'd like to stress that in giving software to all of these communities and working with them, I've tried to pull my own ideology back. So to give the communities the tools and the knowledge to be able to design their own currencies.
I have a question about your understanding of a space that you've been in. I've built a lot of Drupal sites. Drupal's a great platform. I feel your pain. But there are other platforms, Joomla, Django, right? There are lots of things. And we can write modules to enable complementary currency functionality in any of those platforms, right? So that's easy. What is your sense of the community's level of awareness or commitment to the need for those platforms to be interoperable? So if there's Joomla with its plugin over here and Drupal with its plugin over here, we want the interoperability between those communities to function at the exchange level monetarily, right?
Yeah.
Do you think people are becoming aware of that, or do you think we're a long way off?
Do this before he answers, so you know that this is actually the end.
Some activists are very clear that they think that's a good idea, and it's extremely obvious that we need that kind of infrastructure. At the level of the end users, many of them have a vague wish to be able to transact with neighbouring systems, and they do things like write checks out of their own checkbooks, which are cached in the other system with no kind of integrity that's still going on. So there's a full range of things. For me, it's very clear that it would be very valuable and it would enable something which isn't currently possible if we could have a proper open protocol to enable these systems to interact.